I said to the Lord, Thou art my God. Give ear, O Lord, to the voice of my supplications. O God, the Lord, the strength of my salvation, Thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. Psalm 140, verses 6 through 7. Every survivor of war has a story to tell. Stories of triumph and tragedy, faith and fear. Stories like mine, where fact is often stranger than fiction. Since that fateful night of July 30th, 1945, when I stepped off a sinking ship into the unknown depths of the Pacific Ocean, there has never been a day when I have not reflected upon the horrors I experienced in those 4.5 days swimming in shark-infested waters. However, while those frightening memories remain vivid in my mind's eye, one memory eclipses them all, namely the unfailing presence of God that sustained me. Luck had absolutely nothing to do with my survival. I believe with all my heart that it was solely by the providence of God that I lived through those dreadful days and nights. It is therefore to His glory that I recount my story, a story that exalts the one who ultimately authored it. I'm sure that in many ways, my background is no different than hundreds of thousands of other folks who grew up in our great country during the years of the Depression and survived the horrors of World War II. I suppose we all developed a survivor mindset in those days of adversity. As I reflect upon those bittersweet years of blood, sweat, and tears mingled with the joys of family, friends, and faith, I must confess that I wish our country could go back to those times and recapture the core values upon which our nation was founded. Values originally shaped by our founding fathers, who had an unshakable faith in the God of the Bible. Although the current moral freefall of America makes such a desire highly unlikely, perhaps my humble story will remind readers of the strength of character that was born out of that era and manifested in the millions of Americans who fought and died for our freedom.
I'm going to have the gentleman that traveled with Mr. Harrell. His name is Ken, and Ken is going to introduce Mr. Harrell to us. He travels with him for the last 7 years, I believe, and takes him around and gets him where he needs to go. And I have watched him lovingly care for Mr. Harrell just in his last day and a half that I've gotten to meet him. I'm going to ask Ken if you would say a few words to introduce Mr. Harrell to us. Mr. Harrell, you want to come on up to the platform?
Thank you, Pastor Brian, and it is good to be here with you today. Ken Kerr is the name. My parents knew I would have a simple mind. It is good to have Jim and Sandy Belcher also with us today. Jim's dad was also on the USS Indianapolis. He has passed away, but he was a survivor, and he also would have a story to tell. Jim is one of the stewards of the USS Indianapolis reunion that they hold annually now. They used to do it every 5 or 10 years, 5 years I guess it was. But as the gentlemen, the survivors, were dying off, they decided they needed to meet more frequently. And so they now are meeting annually in Indianapolis. They do a wonderful job of hosting the reunion. Out of the 317 that survived, there were 1,197 on board the USS Indianapolis the night it went into the ocean, went down. Ed will tell you all of the details very shortly, or as much as he can. I often say it would take 4.5 days to tell you what really happened in the water, because that's how long he was there. But the book at the book table does tell that, and if you would like to get a copy, we would be more than happy to see that you have a copy. There's a few items of historical interest out there as well. I had the privilege of serving as a chaplain in the United States Army for 30 years. I was a pastor in Indiana for 7 years prior to that, and got called up. I was in the reserves as a chaplain and when President Ronald Reagan was rebuilding the Army, I got ordered to active duty, kind of like the draft. And, but I had a 3-year obligation, which turned into 30 years. I believe that that's what God had called me to do, because it was something that He had in mind. I didn't. Wasn't my plan. So it was wonderful. Towards the end of that 30 years, I was up at Fort Lewis, Washington, and had a 20-state footprint from Alaska down to Texas, and was on the road most of the time. So my wife bought a home back in Tennessee where she could spend time near the kids and the grandkids while I was, who knows where I was in the world, somewhere in those 20 states. She bought the home right next door to Ed and Ola Harrell. When I retired, I met Ed and Ola. You're going to hear Ed's story, and you will hear a story of how God provides in a miraculous way to bring about His purposes for your life, for my life, for Ed's life. God bless you. It's good to be with you. Let us pray. Father, we ask your blessings upon these, the people that have gathered here today. May they be encouraged with the testimony of Mr. Ed Harrell. I pray for Ed that you will give him the clarity of thought as he shares his convictions of how Christ had carried him through the waters for those 4.5 days, and the privilege it has been to serve our Savior these last 70-some years. Bless now, we ask, for your glory and for our good. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
And thank you so much. Maybe advantage when you can't hear, but I hope he said some good things about me. Okay. Now, how many were at the first service? Yeah, okay. Because I've got to back up just a little bit to tell you, as a 17-year-old young man over in Kentucky, knowing what was happening in the Pacific, I thought I wanted to be in part of that action, and I go to draft board and ask them to call me up because I wanted the Marine Corps, I thought, and they obliged, and I ended up San Diego boot camp, and after boot camp, they said, you're going to sea school, which meant that I would be seagoing, go up to San Francisco, and there's the big USS Indianapolis. That's to be my home for the duration of the war. And I might just say that I started out at Saipan, Tinian, Guam, sea battle of the Philippine Seas, where our Task Force 58 shot down 403 Japanese aircraft that day. And then I was down at Iwo Jima. Yes, I was at 3 airstrikes on Tokyo, when we would go all the way up in the Aleutians, pick the worst weather imaginable, come down close to Japan, and bomb. That is our Task Force 58. And then, okay, from there now, Okinawa. It was at Okinawa. We were there for the 6th Marines and the 27th Army to land, making preparation. And I can recall when we were in close enough that they were telling us that you're too close. We couldn't see, but our 8-inch shells was glancing off of many of the concrete pillboxes, and they said, you've got to back up. And we backed up to where the shell could come down and destroy. So we were there for several days preparing the beachhead in Okinawa for the Marines and the Army to land. But I recall a particular morning that the boatswain got his little whistle, and he announced, set emergency condition in the anti-aircraft battery. And okay, we look up, and here is a plane already in a dive, and I'm trying to load a gun, a 40-millimeter gun, but before I could get that shell in and get it cocked ready, he hit. Okay, and a big gaping hole all the way through the ship. Now, we have to come back to the States for repair, and it took some time for the repairs to be made, but okay, all of a sudden one morning, we look out on the dock there in Hunters Point, San Francisco, and out on the dock we noticed all kinds of Marine and Navy brass out there, a lot. And then we noticed that something pulled up there, and they unloaded a big, big crate. I often say it gets bigger every time, like my fish store. It keeps getting bigger, but it was big. Let's say it might have been 12 to 15 feet long, so 4 or 5 feet high and wide. And my Marine captain, I happened to be the corporal of the guard at the time, he said, then Corporal Harrell, follow that into the port hangar deck and set a watch to guard that big crate. Well, I might say that looking at that crate, you could see where they had put a screw in, but they countersunk it and put a wax or something over it. So you dare not mess with that. Well, what was that? We did not know. And maybe no one on the ship, maybe Captain McVeigh had some idea, but he could not have known, because just that morning, July 16, 1945, you know, something happened at Los Alamos, New Mexico. The first successful atomic explosion. Now, what did we have? We had the components of Little Boy, the atomic bomb that just a few days, weeks later, would be dropped at Hiroshima. That's what that carton consisted of. And then momentarily coming aboard, we noticed 2 proposed to be Air Force officers that came aboard. And as they came aboard, they had a little canister in a metal cage, yay big, and a padlock on that. Again, my Marine Captain Park said, Corporal Harrell, follow them up to a certain compartment up there, which was vacant because Admiral Spruance's crew was not aboard. And so I go up and they ushered them in, and they take that little crate. Well, a couple of sailors put a rod in that, put it on their shoulders, and brought it up into that little compartment and put it down on the deck. And then right behind them was a sailor with a blowtorch and a long strip of metal kind of rolled up. And what did he do? He spot welded that down on the deck. Over that spot welded, they did not intend for that to get away. Well, what was it? We had the least idea, but they were protecting it. Now, let me tell you what it was. It was half of all the uranium that America owned at that time. The other half was in San Francisco, would be loaded aboard a B-29, and would meet us in Tinian Island once we delivered our cargo. Okay, now then, we get underway. We get underway, and we have some 5,300 miles to go to Tinian Island, to our B-29 base. Okay, we get started, and I'm telling you, when we got started, we were moving. I don't know how fast that Indianapolis would go, but if it would go 32, 33 knots, that's what it was doing. And oftentimes I'm up on the bridge. I was a captain's orderly, but I recall that the officer of the deck wanted to talk to Captain McVeigh, and somewhere along the line he said, "We've got to slow this thing down, or we're going to burn up the motors." Captain McVeigh kind of walked off a bit, and he turned, and he said, "Keep the same speed," and he turned and went back. We kept the same speed, so there, those 10 days, we had traveled some 5,300 miles, 500 and some odd mile a day. You know, we drove some 625 miles. We spent 2 days just doing that. And anyway, okay, we've delivered now our cargo, and now then, let's go from there. Where am I? Okay, we delivered our cargo, and now then, our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance. The flag was not aboard, but the scuttlebutt was that we were to proceed to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan. And at least we knew, basically, the scuttlebutt. Okay, Captain McVeigh backed up from Tinian to Guam, and there at Sinpax, he asked for his sailing orders, and they tell him, yes, you're to go to the Philippines to prepare for the main invasion of Japan. Now, I might say that that main invasion was to consist of some, I forget, 20,000 American troops. Britain was going to join us, maybe with another 1,000,000, and you could imagine, had we done that, that would have been an Iwo Jima 1,000 times over. But now we are going for that purpose, but Captain McVeigh asked for an escort, and they tell him, you don't need an escort. Now, they were not truthful. Now, may I say, I could identify several different fibs the Navy are guilty of, but they could have said, you need an escort, because 4 days ago, in those same waters, we lost the USS Underhill, a destroyer. We lost 129 boys. They didn't tell him that. They tell him you don't need an escort. Okay, they could have said we have sufficient destroyers that we could send. They don't tell him that. They tell him you don't need an escort. Okay, they could have said, we have broken the Japanese code. We know everything that they're doing. Yes, they even could have said, we know that there is a submarine out there by the name number I-58. They don't tell him that. They send us out in harm's way, unescorted. Okay, we get underway. I'm thinking that we had picked up the components July the 16th, July the 26th, we've delivered them to our B-29 base. July the 27th, we back up to Guam from Tinian. Maybe sometime the 28th, we are getting underway to go to the Philippines. Now the 29th has come. I want to put this in because I want to tell you that something happened on the 29th. We only had 2 sergeants of Marines still aboard at the time, and they were told that they were going to be transferred because they had been aboard a good period of time. Sergeant Cromling and Sergeant Tracy, the only 2 Marines other than our top sergeant, And okay, now then, what's going to happen? Well, there were only 3 corporals. If you look at my pictures of the Marine Corps, and I've got a list of all those that are in that picture, there are only 3 corporals. I happen to be one of them. And Sergeant Greenwald said, we want all 3 of you to come in, and we were officially promoted on the 28th, or maybe officially the 29th. But we are moving. We're going to the Philippines. And then on the night of the 29th, about 14 minutes past midnight, there was a certain submarine out there, Commander Hoshimoto. The I-58 was out there. And now we have no underwater sound gear. We cannot detect him, but he's out there with his little periscope sticking up, and he picked us out, maybe picked us up some 10 mile out there, and all he had to do is wait. Okay, now, I got off a watch then at 12 o'clock, or 12 o'clock, at 12 o'clock. I had the duty earlier in the evening at the change of the watch till 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, my watch is over, and the good captain had, at the change of the watch earlier, 4 hours earlier, was telling over the loudspeaker that it's 110 degrees out. We have no air conditioning aboard the ship. We have a lot of hot air, yes, literally hot air. And Captain McVeigh announced, you're welcome to come out on the open deck and bring your blanket and sleep topside. Now, I know that it was over 90 degrees down in the Marine compartment, so I get my blanket and I come topside. And, okay, where are you going to make your pallet? I go all the way forward. When I say all the way forward, we have, you'll see a picture of the ship out there, and I go all the way forward. The night before, I had slept on top of number 1 turret in a little life raft. Well, I could look up and see the bridge, so to speak, up there, and you're not supposed to be sleeping in those, but I slept there. But now I'm to be a sergeant, and I tell my buddy Munson, I said, Munson, I'm not going to sleep up there tonight. These stripes are too hard to get. And okay, I made my pallet right down on the deck. Okay, so about 14 minutes past midnight, Commander Hoshimoto had us. We didn't know he was out there. And he tells his crew to stand by. He had what they called a Cayoton, which was a torpedo with 2 boys in it, motorized. 2 were in one, 2 wanted to get in another. Now, it would be a suicide mission. And then they had 6 torpedoes loaded, and those in the suicide wanted to be fired, but Commander Hoshimoto was watching. He said, too good a target, and once he fired them, he could not recover them, so he refused to let the one even be fired, and the other were not in their torpedo, so to speak. But he sees that, he announces, code red, stand by, fire, fire, fire. About every 2 seconds, he fired a torpedo. Now then, when I got off a watch that night, as I said, I went forward. I made my pallet right down under the barrels of number 1 turret. And now we're moving now about 17 knots, or like 15 miles an hour, and it's a little windy, and I'm nearly all the way forward. Well, I had my blanket, still had my clothing on. I used the arch of my shoe as my pillow, put my blanket over that, put my head in that, kind of covered my head, and I don't know whether I had begun to kind of doze off, for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 minutes, but nevertheless, all of a sudden, a massive explosion. When I say massive, Kamasha Hoshimoto fired 1, 2, 3. One of those 6 hit the bow of the ship, and it cut the bow of the ship off. Now, when I say it cut it off, I can look at the picture of the ship and the model out there, and I can see what I saw after that first explosion to say about 35 feet of that ship was cut off. Okay, through these years now, in my 2 books, I've told that if you ever find the ship, and National Geographic came from England and interviewed me about 4 hours, and they were looking for it, thought that they would find it. And I said, if you ever find it, you're going to find that that bow of the ship was cut off. And different ones kind of laughed at me for that, because how could you see that and know that? Okay. Now, the second torpedo that hit us was aft a bit, just nearly aft of number 2 turret, just forward of the marine compartment down there, and that set the magazine off in number 2 turret, and that powder magazine blew up, and I thought I could see that later to say that you'll find that that many, many hundreds of tons of that number 2 turret was set off of its mooring just a little bit. Okay, and I record this through the years in the book. I'll get back to this a little later. But anyway, now that I know that the ship is sinking, if you can just visualize that maybe 30 to 35 feet as the ship is cut off. Now we're 1, 2.5 decks deep, about 30 feet wide, without a bow there, and those 4 big screws are still turning and pushing, and all of that water coming in. And I don't know, but I could imagine and feel that I'm feeling and hearing bulkheads down below breaking. That ship is moving, those screws are pushing, that water is coming in. And I know that my emergency station would be the quarterdeck back midship. Regardless of what is happening, you get an emergency whistle and you know what it says to you. I'm to make my way to my emergency station, but on the way back to my emergency station, I'm going by some officers' quarters on the port side forward, and there were those officers coming out from the interior. They were just in their Navy shorts, and they were flash burned. You could see that they were flash burned, or they had put their hand on a hot bulkhead, and they left the skin of the hand on the bulkhead, and they are pleading for someone. They were just nearly out of it, pleading for someone to give them some assistance. Well, there was absolutely nothing that I knew that I could do, possibly had to do over again. I'd still do the same thing, nothing I could do. I could just hope and pray that somehow, some way they could get some help. But I question seriously if help ever came. Now I'm to make my way to the quarterdeck, and I'm kind of rushing to get down there, and the ship I know is sinking, and it's beginning to list to the starboard, not knowing what all has happened on the starboard side forward. But just to tell you that what had happened is that bow is off, and all of the metal for maybe 100, 200 feet on the forward part is off. Now that they found the ship, they proved that point. All of that metal is off, and you could go down 3.5 miles today, and you can see the guts of that ship in good condition. Okay, now then, I'm making my way now to the quarterdeck. And I get to the quarterdeck now, my Marine lieutenant is there, but before I get there, I realize I don't have a life jacket. I know that the ship is sinking. The first 100 yards to the starboard side is already nearly underwater. And I get to the quarterdeck and see my Marine lieutenant. I see big canvas bags of new supply of Kapok life jackets. And I asked Lieutenant Stauffer permission to cut down some of those life jackets. And he says, not until we get word to abandon ship. Well, all communication is knocked out. No electrical power. The only lights that we had was from the infernos below deck and yes, some even topside. The ship is sinking. So I asked my Marine lieutenant, and he said, not until we get word to abandon ship. And then suddenly there was a Navy commander that came through the hatch, and I recognized who he was. And some sailor hollered out, get the commander a life jacket. Well, as he came to the surface, someone then began to cut down those Kapok jackets, and I'm desperate to get one, and finally I managed to get me an old Kapok life jacket. Now, if you don't know what an old Kapok life jacket is, you know what a horse collar is? Imagine a horse collar made into a vest, made out of a flotation device. That's about what it was. And I managed to get me a Kapok jacket, and I'm looking up at what we call Crow's Nest, looking up there where Captain McVeigh maybe would be at that time, hoping and praying that he's going to announce abandon ship, because now the ship is listing so much to the starboard that the quarterdeck would be 8 feet normally above waterline. There's water on the quarterdeck. So you can only imagine what is happening to the first 100 yards of that ship. Well, okay. So finally, word begins to trickle down, and here's kind of the way it came. Abandoned ship, abandoned ship. You could hear the kind of the echo of abandoned ship as it came down from different ones, and we knew that somehow, some way, that abandoned ship. And so what do? I'm on the quarterdeck, and maybe there may have been, 75, 100 men on the quarterdeck, and so we go to the high side because there's water here. We go to the high side, and you grab a hold of that cable, and you look out into the blackness of the night, and you see that oil on that water, maybe a ½ inch of black oil, and you're going to go into that? Yes. If you leave the ship, you're going to go into that. Okay, so when word came, everyone rushed to that cable. You get a hold of that cable, and you look out into the blackness of the night. And may I say this, there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and there is a difference. Now, may I say, I knew to whom I was praying. I knew, and I knew that I was getting a response, not a verbal response, but I knew that I was getting maybe something that I heard in Sunday school. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. I heard that. I knew the Lord was speaking to me, and I'm holding on to that rail, telling him, I don't want to die. I have to say this, Mom and Dad back home, 6 younger brothers, older sister and a younger sister. I don't want to die. And I have to tell you this, there was a certain brunette that said that she would wait for me, and she waited. We were married in 47. She's still waiting. She sent me an email, after these 70-something years, be 71, July the 25th, to tell me last night, I'm praying for you tomorrow there at that church. God bless Ed. Okay, now then, I'm looking out into the blackness of the night, and when most everyone was gone, I'm still holding on to that rail. I know that I've got to get into that oil. I climb over that rail, and the deck of that ship, or the keel of the ship, is, I have to step on that, and I don't want to go in head first. I made 2 big, long steps, jumped in feet first. My kapok came up over my head, and now I get that down and get my head above that oil. No, I'm covered with oil. I mean a half-inch of black oil. And now I'm going to wear that, yes. But I leave the ship. I'm swimming away from the ship. And I remembered, get away from that ship or it'll pull you under. And I'm trying to get away from the ship to see that the first 100 yards is under. It's turning to the starboard. That fan tail is coming high in the air. I look up and I can see those big screws turning. I saw boys that looking down into the blackness of the night, all it is blackness. They jumped into those screws. I'm at a distance, but I could see some boys jumping into that. And then I saw the ship as she turned, going under. I'm trying to get away from it, thinking that it'll pull you under. But no. Look at this. That ship is full of air, and all the topside hatches are sealed. All of that water coming in, it's got to get out some way. And so as it goes under, you can just visualize that air is pushing out of the tail end of that ship. And what is happening? Foam, bubbles, as I saw the ship, maybe at, I don't know, 40, 50 yards or so out there as it went under. Okay, now then, I'm swimming away from the ship after it's gone completely under, and you swim out to the first buddy out here, and we begin to congregate, and we had boys that did not have kapok jackets. They're hanging onto someone, or we had boys that were injured, and someone is trying to assist them. And so here I am, and one of the first things I wanted to know, any Marines? There I found 2 Marines. The first Marine that I found was a new recruit that had just come aboard. And I went to him to discover that he had multiple breaks, no doubt, in his body. He was in misery. Basically, I thought that he was dying even then. I held on to him and tried to encourage him, but basically he died in my arms there within the hour. I knew that there was another Marine. It took me some time to find the other Marine, which was a Marine that had just come aboard by the name of Spooner. And I was acquainted with him. He probably had come aboard in San Francisco before we made that trip. But here's my buddy Spooner. And Spooner had gone into the water head first. And with all that oil in his eyes. And now, how are you going to get rid of that? You aren't. You're going to rub it, and you're going to take that salt water, and if you look up at that sun, that salt is going to turn to powder, and you're going to grind that in your eyes. That's my buddy Spooner. And Spooner couldn't see. He got to where he couldn't see hardly at all. Okay, that's my buddy Spooner. Just we 2 Marines, but now then, we have quite an experience now for the next day or two. to the extent that the next morning after the first night, night becomes before the morning, and so the first morning we had company. You could look out at any time and you could see a big fin out there. And in fairness to the sharks, they were not attacking anyone, but they were there. You can imagine what they're doing to your mind. And then after a little bit, even that first day, we were trying to stay together, but you can just take most of us here and put us in one group, and you go up on a 8-foot swell and it breaks away. You're scattered, and after a time or two, it's more, and the first thing you know, you're really scattered. That's what we were experiencing. But we've got to try to stay together. So we kind of improvised a thought that let's make a circle of able-bodied and keep everyone in the circle. Then when we go up, we kind of drift together. Okay, we were trying to hold them together, but then that first morning, then sharks, boys that are injured now, that are high temperatures, and they aren't going to last much longer. And so you're trying to do your best to caress and help, and then all of a sudden some boy has whether he's had too much salt water by now, and he's hallucinating, or maybe because of his injuries, and he leaves the group, and he's out there 75 yards or so, and you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you look, and you see that kapok jacket go under, and then momentarily it comes back to the surface like a fish cork, and then you see fins, sharks. You dare not to go out and see who your buddy might have been. Sometime later, you will see that body, you check it, and you find out the bottom torso is gone, or he's disemboweled. And after the first day, the second day, and maybe another day, imagine what has happened to that body in that 100-degree temperature. He may be up on a swell, and that swell breaks, and he comes down, and when he comes down like a flash, he bumps into you. He leaves part of the residue of his body on you. You're going to wear that. Yes, now that's going to happen so many times. Okay, let's go through maybe that first day. We're losing boys. And yes, in fairness to the sharks, they are not attacking a larger group, but they're out there and you can see them, and you dare not to get out by yourself. Okay, let's go through that first day now after the first night. This is the second day. Have you ever been thirsty? Really thirsty? Put yourself in 110-degree weather, bareheaded, swimming, not just floating, swimming, maybe helping a buddy, but you're doing something and you're trying to do your best to stay afloat and stay alive. And then, okay, you're desperate for some water. And you'd see a buddy, a sailor in this case, would say he tore off some of his clothing, had a patch of cloth, and he put some water up in that, put his head under it, and he drank some of that salt water. And he says it's not too bad. It's about 85-degree water. Oh, and it's wet, but wait. Just wait. Within the hour, that salt hits that brain, and that brain doesn't know who he is. He may be a Jap. He may be a Jap or he may be a sailor that has a canteen of water in his backpack, and he takes out his sheath knife and he stabs his buddy that's got some hidden water. Or he may be a Jap, and he attacks the Jap. Blood, blood, blood. Now that's going to happen multiple times. Okay, every little bit we're losing boys. But sometime now, that second day after the second night now, have you ever been thirsty? Really? Really? Have you ever been so thirsty that your tongue now is swelling in your mouth? You dare not drink that salt water because you see what takes place. But you are so thirsty, and then all of a sudden you see a little rain cloud. Where are we? Like you see here oftentimes, you see a little rain cloud coming over, and it's raining, and what do? I'll tell you what you do. You turn your mouth heavenward, and that little rain cloud comes over, and you don't realize you've got your face covered with oil, but you turn your head up heavenward, and you thank the Lord for just a few drops of water. Yes, you take those greasy hands, and you funnel some water, and you get, a few tablespoons of water. But as it gets down here for a few minutes, what does it say? We've got to come out, and it comes out that oil is not compatible. And so you get rid of just a little bit of the water that you thought was so wonderful. Okay, now then, my buddy Spooner, I say this kindly, but Spooner was a character. When he came aboard our ship, Captain Parks came to me and said, Corporal Harrell, your squad is one man short, and I have to tell you that you are going to inherit Spooner. And here's the history of Spooner. He's been shanghaied out of 3 different places, but he's going to be in your squad. You have to handle him and talk to him. We cannot allow him to bring reproach on the Marine Corps aboard this ship. If you can't handle him, we'll get someone that can. Okay, I get Spooner aside, and I said, Spooner, you don't know me, I don't know you, but here's what Captain Parks has told me. I'll be your friend. I'll help you in every way I can, but you've got to toe the mark, or else you will be out of here. And he listened, and he believed me, and I followed through with that. I never called on him to do anything that I wouldn't have called on someone else, or that I didn't agree to help him on. Okay, now that's my buddy Spooner. Now, Spooner, with his eyes as they are, he just says to me, Harold, I can't stand this anymore. I can't take this. Well, Spooner, there's nothing we can do, it's just wait. He says, I can't wait. I'm not going to wait. I said, Spooner, you have to wait. He said, Harold, I'm not going to wait. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to dive down so far that I'll drown before I come back up. I said, Spooner, you're not going to do any such thing. There's only 2 Marines in this group, and there's going to be 2 Marines when rescue comes, and rescue is going to come. Now, I believe that. I wasn't just talking. I believe that. And I turned Spooner to me, and I'd fastened his kapok jacket onto mine, and we swam through that night. Now we come to the 3rd day now. The 3rd day. What is happening? Okay, let me give you some perspective. There was 80, the 3rd day at noon, 17, that's all. What has happened? No one knows. There's 17. Well, an old kapok jacket will not last, 4.5 days, not even hardly 3 days. By now, they're so waterlogged that we are seated in them. But you've got to keep swimming just to keep your head above water. If you quit swimming, it has enough buoyancy, it'll pitch you maybe in the water. So you have to keep yourself erect. Okay, there's 17 of us, and I can hear this one sailor today. I can hear it as plain as yesterday. God, if you're out there, we have to have help. I've got a son back home I've never seen. We have to have help. And may I say, he has never got to see his son, no. There's 17 of us. Now then, different ones were saying, we can't just keep these old kapoks on and keep swimming. And one of the boys said, look, I've pulled mine down under me. I'm seated in it, and it has the same buoyancy. The only thing, it's 4 inches or so, maybe more, down in the water. And so now then, you can keep swimming and keep your head a little more above water. And now there's 17 of us with our kapok jackets down under us, and we're still having to work. We aren't sitting out there floating around. We're keeping our heads above the water. And then sometime then later that afternoon, we hear voices. We hear voices, or we see something, and we look out, and maybe 6, 8 foot swells, and we see something out there. And what is that? It's up, we're down, it's up, we're up. Oh, look, it looks like a little makeshift of a raft. Yes, and we holler. Finally, we're close enough that we can hear each other, and we are making our way to them. They're making their way to us. And finally, we see it's a little makeshift of a raft. A little makeshift of a raft, and it's coming to us. We're going to it, and it's getting closer, and then it's close enough we can see no one is on the raft. No one is on the raft. Yes, but there were 5 sailors around that raft. And what was on the raft? I'll tell you what was on the raft. They had taken kapok jackets off of boys that had already expired, and maybe they had said the 23rd Psalm or the Lord's Prayer, taken that kapok off, put it on that little raft, but before they put it on there, 2 boys would take that and squeeze it out, squeeze it in opposite direction, put it up on that little makeshift of a raft. That raft consisted of 3 or 4 40-millimeter ammunition cans, 2 or 3 old slatted orange crates, 2 or 3 old slatted potato crates, and they had those lashed together, and they had kapok life jackets squeezed out up on that little raft. And they came into our group. They said, we have to get closer enough to the Philippines. The Philippines is there in the west. We didn't know it was another 500 miles, but the Philippines is there someplace. We have to get closer. Now, we see every day our B-29s flying at 30,000 feet. No one sees us, and they want to know, anyone want to join us? And I say to my buddy Spooner, I'm going to go with them. 15 sailors thought that you're crazy. And my response was, there was about, maybe 80 of us. What's happened? There's only 17 of us. And I tell my buddy Spooner, I'm going to go with them. And Spooner said, Harold, if you go, I'm going with you. 2 Marines joined 5 sailors, and we think we're going to go to the Philippines. Now, we left those 15 sailors. Let me get ahead of the story and say, None of those 15 sailors ever survived. 2 Marines went with 5 sailors, and we are plugging away. Sometime later that afternoon, they had me up in the front corner of that raft and said, "You've got to keep us going in the westward direction," and we're making some headway. And then we came up on 6 or 8 foot swell. I could look off out there someplace, and finally it's up when I'm up. And I said, "Look, there's something out there. Wonder what that could be. I'm going to swim out and get it. Look." And they could see it, but they said, "Yeah, the shark will get you." But I said, "But the sharks haven't been around us. I'm going to swim out there." There was a compelling influence saying, "Go and see what that might be." I put my kapok jacket on me. I do a dog paddle, and I get out to whatever that was. I get out within 6 feet or 8 feet or so of that old slatted potato crate, and I could see those half-rotten potatoes floating on the top. In desperation, I'm reaching in to get that first potato, and as I got that first potato, kind of the agony of defeat as I squeezed that rot squeezed between my fingers, and I think, rotten potatoes, but you know what? It was solid on the inside. And to take that half-rotten potato and peel it with your hands and then peel it with your teeth, and it's solid on the inside. Okay, may I say, that is all the water or food that I had for some 5 days. Okay, so my buddies see me out there. What is it? Rotten potatoes. They leave the raft and they came out and joined me. Now, all we had was half-rotten potatoes, but we had a little bit of food. Now then, I've got my buddy Spooner with me. Spooner can't see. And I said, "Spooner, I'm going to tie you onto this raft. You cannot get away from the raft because I can't find you." And "Okay, Harold, I'll hang on to the raft." Okay, now then, the seas calm down at night. We've had a spare life jacket, and morning comes now, the 4th day, and something happened just the night before, though. About 1 o'clock in the morning that night, I have the watch in the museum now that I was wearing, and it's about 1 o'clock, and I heard voices, and I tell our crew, "Hey, listen, there's someone out there." Now it's dark, and by voice they're coming in. Whether or not we were going toward them, I don't know. After a period of time, here a Navy lieutenant, and I don't know whether there's 2, 3, 4, 5 boys that were kind of following his voice coming into our group. They came into our group, and Charles McKissick, the Navy lieutenant that I knew aboard ship, and oftentimes when I'm the captain's orderly, McKissick would take this greenhorn Marine and give him a message to give to a captain or someone, and he could tell that I did not know what I was doing, and he was the kind of a gentleman that would say, "Hey, Marine, repeat that back." You ever try to repeat something from someone and you don't even understand what they're telling you? I didn't know the nomenclature of something traveling at a certain speed, unknown object out there, and to tell the captain or someone, he'd have me to repeat that. After maybe the 3rd time, I could repeat it. That was McKissick. That was the kind of a gentleman that he was. Now this is McKissick. He joins our group there that night. And there was a certain Marine that had a pocket full of half-rotten potatoes that he shared with McKissick. And now then, it's black, black, black. We're hanging on to that raft. Okay, finally, we have a spare life jacket. Now then, the seas calm down. Now the 4th morning, it's calm. I don't know what has happened. Where's the raft? I don't know where the raft is. Where's Spooner? I don't know where Spooner is. I'm with McKissick, one sailor. And we are somewhat out to ourselves. I saw that sailor do what I'd seen so many times and have to say, it's much easier to die than it is to live. I saw that sailor, his head had dropped in the water. I go over to him and I said, hang in there, buddy. And I get him to kind of erect himself, and I could tell that he could care less. And he would respond to me, and I would leave him, tell him that the help is on its way. And the second time I checked him, the same thing. The third time I checked him, too late. He's gone. So just McKissick and myself. And McKissick was a gentleman that I knew as a Navy lieutenant and this old corporal here. And so we are discussing many things. He had been to the Philippines, and he thought we would make it, and he promised to take me under wing once we got there. Now, we didn't know it was another 500 miles, but anyway, that's McKissick. Okay, we are struggling. We are seated in our kapok jackets, and we're having to keep moving. If you quit, you're going to be pitched in the water, and now you don't have the strength to get that inner tube, so to speak, back under you. And so we are struggling to keep our heads above water. And now we see our B-29s up there at, just see the trail. Every little bit you see the trail of our B-29s bombing Tokyo. Now, they couldn't see us, but we could hope and pray that somehow that someone could see us. And then all of a sudden, I hear a plane. I hear a plane. Look, 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 look. There's a plane. And there was a plane up there. Now, I could see it was a twin engine. I could see it had wheels. And I'm waving, and let me take you up there. Lieutenant Gwynn flying that Ventura, yes, he was out on a search and destroy. I didn't know anything about what's happening up there, but let me tell you what was happening. Lieutenant Gwynn was out on a search and destroy looking for submarines, and if he gets down low enough that he can see very much, his radio antenna would not pick up base back in Palau. He was flying out of Palau. So he had to stay 5,000 feet or so even to reach base. But at a given point up there, Lieutenant Gwynn says to the co-pilot, take over this aircraft. We've got trouble with that antenna that trails behind the aircraft. The stabilizer on that has come off, and it's just flipping back and forth. He said, take over control. I'm going to go aft. I'm going to pull in that antenna. I'm going to put a stabilizer on that. And he goes aft to do that. He opens the bomb bay door. And as he opened the bomb bay door, then you have to realize, what did he see? He glanced down at the water down there someplace. What did he see? I spoke to the 100th anniversary of the Boy Scouts out in Spokane. Only 5,700 there for that week. I said, he saw your little mirror. He saw your little mirror. He saw the oil on our clothing down there. And when he saw that flash from that oil, he rushes back to take over control of the plane. And the crew says, what is it? He said, look down there. Well, you don't look out of an aircraft up there and see anything. But when he took over control, what did he do? He reaches for the speaker, and he gets on the speaker, load the bombs, load the bombs. Literally, what he saw told him there was a Jap sub down there maybe, and he's going to go down and investigate, but the bombs are loaded. We see him. Look, he's coming in. And he was coming in. But let me take you back up there. Lieutenant Gwynn, flying at that distance, he's looking forward of him, let's say 4 miles. He's looking out his peripheral vision 2.5 miles each side. He's looking at 20 square miles down there. And to see a man's head down there 6 by 8 inches, impossible. But in the providence of God, he saw, let me tell you, he saw, when he saw that oil slick, he's coming in on a bombing run. We see from down here, look, he's coming in. And he was coming in. His bombs were loaded. But as he gets down a certain distance, what does he see? He sees, he says, as far as his eyes could take him, he could see debris and boys. But he came down with that Ventura, and may I say today, I can look up at any time as I think. I can see Gwen as he circled McKissick and I maybe 2 or 3 times. He tilted those wings to say, I see you down there. I can't do anything. I can't land these wheels. So he goes back up, and he goes someplace. Well, what did he do? He went back up, and he could reach Paloux to announce to someone down there, ducks on the pond. Whose ducks? No one knows. He gets a hold of a PBY pilot, Adrian Marks, and tells Marks his location out there. And Marks tells him that that's an hour and a half, 150 miles or so, but we are loaded up. We're ready to come. Momentarily, we'll be there. And so they get in that PBY, and they're coming. They pass over a destroyer out there to tell them that ahead of you is all kinds of debris, boys. And Commander Clater says that I'll be there as soon as I can. But Marks comes on in that PBY. He finally gets to our destination there. And now he's coming in, taking inventory. And he says that you were scattered over maybe 25 miles. Anyway, you're scattered every place. A few boys in some life rafts, a few boys on floater nets, but he asked permission to do a no-no. That would be to set that PBY down in open sea. They tell him no way. But now he's already been in, and he says he saw more sharks than he saw boys. He saw sharks attacking boys. Who are they down there? No one knows. Are they American boys, Japanese boys? It would have made no difference. And he asked permission to land. You do not set that aircraft down in the open sea. But the crew says, we have to land. Okay, may I say, I see that big PBY as it comes in, and you can tell that he's going to have to land, or he's going to ditch the plane. And to see the tail of that aircraft down so low, and he everything but put that thing in a stall, and that tail of that aircraft caught maybe a 8-foot swell, pitched him into the next. I'm his squad leader that he had been tied on to me the night before, and now he had stayed tied onto that raft. Okay, my buddy Spooner. And okay, they picked up 56 of us. And then the Doyle finally comes in then later. And after the Doyle is in, kind of parked out there, now they actually put me in a stretcher and take me over then in a motor whale boat to the Doyle. And vertically I'm brought aboard the Doyle, and some sailor from Nashville grabs a hold of me, and a kind gentleman that he was, and takes two of them take me down below deck. Have you ever had a kerosene bath or a diesel fuel bath? If you're covered with oil, how are you going to get that off? Okay, they gave me a bath in some time of diesel fuel or kerosene. Now then, any place that your flesh had rubbed, now that is infected, and it's, may I say, it's rotten. Or anything rubbed with your K-pot jacket, and now when you break that open, blood, blood, blood. And so, okay, they cleaned me up and put me in a pair of Navy skivvies and put me in a bunk, and I'm bleeding so much that they rubbed me down with Vaseline gauze. And okay, now let's take you on from there. Okay, so much. I've got another hour to go, but anyway, there is a second one later, and I'll pick it up from here.
Okay.
Because there's much more to the story. But I have to ask some of you that were here, what was the last thing that I was telling you? Huh? Huh? Saw Spooner. Okay. Okay, now then, Spooner is, as some of you were not here in the first or the second, this is the third. Okay. Okay, my buddy Spooner. I'm with my buddy Spooner. After swimming with him for 4.5 days of a group of maybe 80, but of that group of 80, I have to say with the third day at noon there were 17. Of those 17, only 2 of those 17 survived. From 80 down to 2 men, and then we joined with another small group of 5, and may I say, none of those 5 survived. Now then, of all the boys, from the 80 to the 5 that joined us with a little raft, and to the 5 or 6 that joined us with McKissick, myself, and my Marine buddy Spooner. Only 3 out of my group of 80 and those 2 groups that bumped into us. Now then, it's been my, I think, pleasure and honor these years since 2005. I'm going to back up a bit and say, after shipwreck, I came home. I didn't tell the story. I couldn't tell the story and didn't tell the story. I had a CPA for 15 years, and it wasn't until about after that period of time that my CPA even knew anything about the Indianapolis story. But finally, I had to tell it out of an embarrassment situation once, and I found that the best cathartic for this old Marine was to tell the story. And after I told it once or twice, I suffered for it, but I saw 2 things. It was a cathartic for me, and it was something that needed to be told, because the story has to do with the largest casualty at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy, in the loss of 880 of my shipmates. And if you tune into your TV very often, you know that they found the Indianapolis. A couple of months ago, they found the Indianapolis. And I get some phone calls to tell me they found the Indianapolis. And my first response, where, number 1? Number 2, what was the condition of the Indianapolis. And lo and behold, it's exactly as I said that they would find it, because I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret, and I told them that 35 feet of that bow was cut off. How do you know? I was there. I know it was cut off. They found it. You know where they found the bow? A mile from the ship. Okay. I'm so delighted that they found it. Now then, there's so much more of the story, and how to pick up from here to give you a little more perspective. Let me do this. We were rescued finally, and we go our separate ways. Okay, I went to a hospital in Palau after they rescued me. I don't know how many others were there because I was not in good condition, but they did not have a good hospital there. And I caught a hospital ship. I say I caught it. They brought me by the Tranquility like a Red Cross ship from Palau to Guam. I'm in the hospital there. But when I get there, even after 2 or 3 days, can you imagine a body that's beginning to rot away because of salt water and oil and salt? So I get to Guam in the hospital, and I recall that it was on the 6th of August. Now, we were sunk July the 30th. 6th of August, I'm in the hospital, and I'm somewhat fastened down on a cot. I'm just rotting away. Any place and any flesh would rub, it's infected with that oil and salt water and whatever. And so what do? They wrap me literally in Vaseline gauze to stop the blood and so on. And so they have my legs tied down, my arms tied down, and I'm on a cot. And I recall there was an admiral that came aboard that I knew, Admiral Spruance. He had quarters aboard our ship. He was not aboard at that time. But here he sat, and he pinned the Purple Heart on me and wished me Godspeed. And then over on another cot, there was an individual from the Louisville Courier Times or something, anyway, a newspaper. And he says, Corporal Harrell, did you know what that cargo was that you were taking? No, we didn't know, and we didn't know. He says, you know, today, August the 6th, Hiroshima, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 2 days later, August the 9th, the second bomb was dropped at Nagasaki. A few days after that, like on August the 12th, the Japs were aboard the Missouri. The war is over. Okay, now then, I finally made it back from Guam, thinking that I'm eager and anxious to go home. And you that were here earlier know that Mom and Dad and my family were waiting, and that brunette, yes, she was waiting. And okay, so finally I came back to San Francisco, no, to where? San Diego. I came back to San Diego, yeah. I came back to Marine headquarters there. Okay, I got off of a ship, and some Marine was nice enough that he got me a ride to Marine Corps Base, San Diego. No fanfare of anything. They get me there, and they provide quarters for me. And on the night of That would have been like October the 2nd. Now, we were shipwrecked July 30. I'm finally back in the States now. And October the 2nd, I'm told that, hey, Marine, you've got a 90-day leave. On the 4th, you'll be going home on the 5th of October. Okay, the night of the 4th, I think I'm going home. They gave me a new Marine Corps, at least a new outfit, and I think I'm going home tomorrow. And okay, through the night I'm thinking about home, home, home. But something began to happen. What? Something is not right. And I'm bent double. And I couldn't wait for morning to come. And finally, a sergeant came in and I said, I've got to get to sick bay. And okay, long story short, Balboa Hospital, San Diego, perforated appendix. And they checked my blood count and they said, can't operate. Can't operate? No. What can you do? And they said, well, there's a new medication that's out and we're going to try that on you. Okay, what's that? Penicillin. Penicillin? Okay, I didn't know what it was. I soon found out. Every 2 to 4 hours I became a pincushion for 29 days. 29 days, I took 11,800,000 units of penicillin. Well, as you can see, it must have worked. But I'm in the hospital now in San Diego through Thanksgiving, through Christmas, through New Year's, and it was, I think, maybe the 6th of January before I finally got out of the hospital and finally made it home. And now, from what had happened of the shipwreck, on the 14th day, well, I'm losing my dates, but nevertheless, my mom and dad had gotten an email that I was a casualty aboard the Indianapolis, but no contact with me, no contact. Now here I am, Balboa Hospital, San Diego, didn't get out until maybe the 6th or so of that would have been in 46, wouldn't it? Now then, that brunette that has waited for me now these many years is still waiting today. And one of the first things that she always asked me, Ed, did you tell them that the ship went down in 12 minutes? I don't know. No. But let's back up a bit and say when we took the torpedoes from the Jap sub, the ship actually went down in some 12 minutes, and I swam with the sharks literally for 4.5 days. And at the end of those 4.5 days, of the 1,197 boys, there were only 317 of us still alive to be rescued. Of that 317, there were 9 Marines. Later, those 9 Marines trickled down to just 1. I'm the last Marine. The other question that my wife always asked, did you tell them about the possibility of Lieutenant Gwynn spotting you in the water, the miracle when after all of those 5 days to look up at that plane, you know that he's coming in, and he comes in, but he can't land. All he can do is to come down and circle us. Only two of us now, only two. I was with 17, later with 5, later with 2. Where are those others? None of them made it. Now, and my wife asked me, did you tell them about Lieutenant Gwynn spotting us in the water? And I haven't, because I haven't read that. But Adrian Marks that picked us up in that PBY, he and Lieutenant Gwynn that spotted us, and Marks that picked us up, they came to our reunions as long as they were alive. And we had 317 and their families, you know, for as long as any survivors. Today, though, it's trickled down to where I think there are 16, but possibly only at best 9 might be even able to come to our reunions. Now then, I want to just tell you what Marks has to say about Lieutenant Gwynn spotting us in the water. And here's what he says. What was the chances that Wilbur Gwynn would fly a course that would take him directly over you? And what was the chances that his radio antenna would break while he was out on that mission? And what was the chances that his bomb bay doors were having some real problems with that? What were the chances that he would look straight down on one of you? You didn't have a chance in a million. I know that you prayed a lot. Yes, we did. And I can say I knew to whom I was praying. I know that some of you feel that it made a difference. Yes, yes. Wilbur Gwynn is a wonderful man and a fine pilot. He never said that he heard a voice speak to him, but was there an unseen hand upon his shoulder? Did he find you by pure chance? The odds against it are 1 in a million, nay, 1 in a billion. But somehow he was chosen as the instrument to overcome these impossible astronomical odds. Wilbur Gwynn looked down at the split second that would become one of the great moments of history. I am proud to know him as a friend. For 40 years I have reflected on the blind courage and the unbelievable greatness of spirit that each survivor had when he was brought aboard my airplane, and I have been compelled by the evidence of my own eyes to believe in miracles. And yes, it was a miracle that after this period of time that the Lord would see fit to spare 316 of us, of which I was telling you that of that 316, our reunion's coming up July the 30th, possibly at best 6. But we will get a big turnout from 880 of those shipmates that did not make it. Now the second, third, and fourth generations of those, they know the history of the Indianapolis, and they know that the Indianapolis has been discovered, and they may not know that their loved one is with those 300 at the bottom of the Philippine Sea, but at least they know that the Indianapolis has been discovered, and that is the happy hunting place burial of some 300 of the shipmates. And of those others to make up those 880 that did not survive, they are someplace there in the Philippine seas. I don't know whether any of you have seen any of the film of the Indianapolis, the discovery of the Indianapolis. Have you seen that, any of you? Okay, PBS maybe will still have it. You can still find it, and you can still get some pictures of it. I've seen it, and I revel at the fact that it's in the condition that I said that they would find it in, because I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret, and I knew that the bow was cut off. And yes, they found the bow a mile from the ship. Now then, I don't know what's going to happen to the Indianapolis story after this, but I might say that, backing up a bit, we have the sinking of the Indianapolis in 1945. We have the USS Indianapolis sub that was launched back in, I believe it would have been in 72 or so. I was invited to Groton, Connecticut when they launched that. Now it's obsolete. Just the past week or two, the new USS Indianapolis up in Wisconsin. If you have seen anything of the New Yorker, it's similar to that. And it is a fast, really a sophisticated ship with firepower that's nearly intercontinental. Anyway.
Well, Mr. Harrell,
now then, my time is up.
Oh, no, I wanted
and I'm going to just thank you again.
I wanted to just make sure before you step down that especially for the young people who are here, I would assume that many of you who are an older generation, you understand that this man represents what was called by Walter Cronkite the greatest generation. And it's so easy for the younger kids who, I'm sure some of them may be a little bit disengaged, not understanding the story that you just heard and the hero who's standing before you. I hope that those of you who are moms and dads, that you'll sit your children down and explain to them who spoke to them in church this morning. And the church service is not about Edgar Harrell. Church service is not about the men and women who went down on the USS Indianapolis. This church is about Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. I understand that. But God uses people to influence lives. And God saved this man's life of 317 people out of over 1,100. And it could be very well for him to have spoken to you today. And I say that because God has a purpose for every one of you. And then we all have different stories. This story that he tells is unparalleled. None of us have a story like that. But we all have a story. And God wants to use you just as Mr. Harrell has allowed God to use him. And I hope that you understand what a true Christian. I wish you could have been here in the first service when he shared his testimony. Powerful about how he was saved. I hope that you allow God to use you in a different way than God will use Mr. Harrell, but for the same glory of the same God. Aaron, would you come on up? Would you lead us in? Would you close this time in a word of prayer, and then we'll go into our praise and worship time after that. But would you just lead us in a word of prayer? And I do want you to I want to ask if you would please, all of you sitting out there, pray for Mr. Harrell for his continued health, and pray for his wife and the safety that he and Ken will need on the way home today.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, just what a blessing this time has been, and Lord, what an inspiration to have a true American hero with us today. And God, we praise you that you chose him. We not just to survive a tragedy at sea and the worst loss of life in U.S. naval history, but God, you chose him to save him from the power of sin so many years ago. And Lord, that you are using him now to talk about what you brought him through. And I'm sure at the time he didn't understand your purpose for what he was going through, but Lord, now you are using him, and your purpose is so apparent to all of us as we see that you're using a man of God to talk about your faithfulness in most uncertain times and against all odds. You saved him. So, Lord, we thank you for him and so many other brave men and women that were willing to give their lives. And, Lord, we commemorate the memory of those that were with him that did not make it. And, Lord, we thank you for allowing men and women and giving them the courage to come and fight so that we could have freedom. But, Lord, most of all, we thank you for sending your Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross to deliver us from our sins. Lord, bless the rest of our time together as we sing to your name and we sing praises to who you are. Lord, may our hearts just be an overflow of praise and thanksgiving to you. We ask all these things in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.